Hello, everybody. This is Miss Kopak. Today, we are going to measure to the nearest half inch and quarter inch. Yesterday, you watched a video that taught you how to measure to the nearest half inch. So if you didn't see that video, you might want to go back and watch it. Today, we'll do a quick review of half inches, and then we'll spend the rest of the time measuring to the nearest quarter inch. So to review half inches, here I have a ruler and I'm measuring this picture of a paintbrush. So remember, to measure to the nearest half inch, I have to count in halves. 0, a half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, and so on. So I see my paintbrush goes past the 2 but does not go all the way to the 3. So this is in the 2-inch range. And the line that's right in between the 2 and the 3 is the half mark, and that is where my paintbrush ends. So I would say that my paintbrush is 2.5 inches long, and IN is the abbreviation for inches. Let's look at this one. About how long do you think this pencil is? You will notice it goes past the 9 but does not go all the way to the 10. And since it ends right in between, that's our half mark. So this pencil is 9.5 inches long. And let's look at this little ladybug. About how long is the ladybug? This ladybug ends right around the 2-inch mark. And whole numbers are used when we count by halves. So I don't always have to have a fraction in my measurements. 2 inches is the length of this ladybug. And let's do one more. How about the ice cream cone? If you said 5.5 inches, you are correct. It does not go all the way to the 6, but it is definitely past the 5. This is about 5.5 inches long. All right, today we are going to measure to the nearest quarter inch as well. So quarters should sound familiar to you because we use quarters when we learned about money. And remember, 4 quarters makes $1. Because of that, we say that anytime we break things into fourths, we're breaking them into quarters. So this circle here is broken into 4 pieces. It's broken into fourths. Each piece is a quarter of the circle, or 1/4 of the circle. When we measure to the nearest quarter inch, you will follow a pattern like you see on the screen. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. And then 4/4 is our whole number. So that would be 1. When we were doing half inches, we would go 0, half, 1. Notice a half and 2/4 are at the exact same spot. That is because they are equivalent. Remember when we learned about fractions, we would shade in a half and shade in 2/4, and we could see they were the exact same amount. So 2/4 and a half are equivalent. So a lot of the times when you measure and you get 2/4 as your answer, people will normally change it to a half. It's pretty rare to say 2/4. If you say 2/4, it's okay, you are correct, but most people would change it to a half. So let's try counting by fourths. So I'm going to follow that same pattern, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and then my whole number. So I start at 0. Down at the bottom shows what we did yesterday with counting by halves. I'm going to use the top this time. So 0, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 1. 1 and 1/4, 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4, 2. 2 and 1/4, 2 and 2/4, 2 and 3/4, 3. 3 and 1/4, 3 and 2/4, 3 and 3/4, 4. Can you keep going with me? 4 and 1/4, 4 and 2/4, 4 and 3/4, 5. 5 and 1/4, 5 and 2/4, 5 and 3/4, 6. 6 and 1/4, 6 and 2/4, 6 and 3/4, 7. 7 and 1/4, 7 and 2/4, 7 and 3/4, 8. 8 and 1/4, 8 and 2/4, 8 and 3/4, 9, 9 and 1/4, 9 and 2/4, 9 and 3/4, 10, 10 and 1/4, 10 and 2/4, 10 and 3/4, 11, 11 and 1/4, 11 and 2/4, 11 and 3/4, 12, and we can stop there. Of course, you could keep going if you really wanted to. So I'm going to follow that pattern to help me measure to the nearest 1/4 inch. So here's that paintbrush we saw earlier, except there's been a little change to it. So I see that my paintbrush has grown a little bit. Isn't that interesting? So it's still past the 2, but not quite to the 3. And here is that half mark that we saw last time. But I noticed it's past the half mark, but not all the way to the 3. So that means 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. It's 2 3/4 inches. I put the period after the IN. Let's look at another. How about this baseball bat? So I notice it goes all the way past the 10. Now let's look at where it ends. It's not all the way at the 11 yet. So let's count 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. It is 10 3/4 inches. So on the screen, I wrote this pattern. If you're having trouble remembering, you might want to write it down somewhere. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. And then remember, the other way to say 2/4 is a half. So let's look at this dinosaur picture. Let's try measuring it. About how long do you think this dinosaur is to the nearest 1/4 inch? I notice it goes past the 4, but it does not go all the way to the 5. It ends right at this first little line. That's our 1/4. So this is 4 1/4 inches. Let's try the train. About how long do you think the train is? You can pause the video to figure it out, or you can write it down on a piece of paper. About how long is this train? It goes all the way past the 9, but not quite to the 10. So it goes 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This is 9 3/4 inches. Let's try the bear. About how long is the bear? You can pause the video if you need to. It goes past the 5. And if we follow this pattern, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, it ends at the 1/4 line. 5 1/4 inches. Now I'm going to get a little bit trickier. Remember I told you in the last video that rulers can be a little different from each other. Some rulers might look like this one that only have a few lines in between the whole numbers. Then there are other rulers that have a lot more lines in between the whole numbers. So this one, you can see there are several lines in between the whole numbers. They actually, instead of breaking it into 4 pieces, this one's broken into 8 pieces. There are some rulers that are broken into 16 pieces. So there's a lot of lines on those rulers. But you can still find the half mark by looking right in between the whole numbers. So right in between the 2 and the 3, there's my half. Right in between the 1 and the 2, there's my half. And then once you find the half, it's easy to find the 4th mark if you split your half in half. So here is my half, and if I look right in between, there's my 4th. And here is the half to the whole number, right in between, there's my 4th. So here's the half in between 2 and 3. And if I look right in between here, here is my 4th. And if I look right in between here, here is my 4th. So find your half mark and then split those halves in half to find your fourths. So looking at this turtle, I see that the turtle goes past the 5, and I can find my half mark. The line right in the middle is this one, and it is past the half mark. So it's not going to be 2/4. It's going to be a little bit bigger. And I notice it is right in between my half and my whole number. That is the 3/4 mark. So this turtle is 5 3/4 inches long. Let's try a few more. This time we will measure some lines. So I have my ruler here, and my ruler has been broken into 8 equal pieces. I'm going to go to the top red line, line up my ruler. Let's take a look at this. It doesn't even get all the way to 1 inch. So let's find our half mark. Our half right in the middle, there it is. This is longer than a half. So remember, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This is 3/4 of an inch. Let's try the next one. About how long do you think this is? You can pause the video if you need to. It goes past the 2, but not all the way to the 3. And here is our half mark right in the middle. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So this is 2 3/4 inches. Let's go to the next one. About how long is this line? You can pause the video if you need to. So it goes past the 3, and here is the half mark. It does not get to the half. So we have 3 1/4, 3 1/4 inches. And our last one, about how long is this line? Here is the 1 and the 2, and it is right in the middle. 1/4, 2/4. Do you remember the other way to say 2/4? 2/4 is the same as a half. So 1 1/2 inches. If you said 1 2/4 inches, you are still correct, but most people would say 1 1/2 instead. So the big things that I want you to remember when you are measuring to the nearest 1/4 inch is to use this pattern. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 1. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 2. And remember, when you use 2/4, that's the same as a half. The other thing I want you to remember is to check the ruler that is being used. So if your ruler is broken into fourths, like this one, 1, 2, 3, 4 equal pieces, that's going to be pretty easy to find which fourth you are going to use, because you just have to follow that pattern, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. But if your ruler has even more than 4 spaces, then you're going to have to find the fourth mark by finding your half and then breaking your half in half. So here's my half, which means this would be my 1/4, my half, and my 3/4. So you have to explore your ruler and check it out before you measure. Always check your ruler, because it can be very easy to make a mistake if you're not paying attention to those lines on your ruler. I think you are ready to try doing some measurement on your own in Seesaw. Toodaloo, kangaroos.